lot of very interesting things that are happening that are so weird in the world today. Well, we all know that there are two major conflicts happening in the world, one between Russia and Ukraine and the other one in the Middle East. Are these conflicts going to ever end? Are these conflicts just slow, long escapades of war, which are being funded by, big powers? Now, on one hand, people keep talking about the geopolitical shift that's happening where it's no longer a US dominant world order because countries like Russia, China, and possibly India and Brazil also want a say in the global affairs. But the fact is that as of today, we are still living in a country, living in a world which is basically unipolar, and the major power still happens to be the United States of America, which is also going through election season this year, and the world will get to see whether it's going to be Donald Trump or it's going to be Kamala Harris who's going to become the next president of the US of A. But now let's talk about where India's role is right now. We are actually surrounded by very volatile countries. Pakistan is a volatile country. Bangladesh has become a volatile country thanks to the recent fall of Sheikh Hasina's government. Sri Lanka it's always been in a dicey situation since their economy collapsed, but they're still relatively much better off. And we all know what happened with India and Maldives, who also happens to be our neighbor. And Myanmar is actually right now in a very troubled state because the country is basically managed by the army and they're quite a ruthless nation right now. Myanmar has absolutely zero law and order. And on the other hand, northern side of India, we are surrounded by China. China is the second most powerful country in the world in terms of GDP and in terms of military. They are truly a powerhouse, and that's a country which is relatively in a cold war against the United States of America. And this country, China, happens to have problems with all its neighbors almost. Take a look at this video that has basically come out from the Philippines border of China. Chinese warships have actually entered Filipino waters and they're actually toiling and trolling all simple ships, fishing boats of Filipino origin. Filipino boats, Filipino ships are being simply surrounded by the Chinese Navy. The entire Chinese Air Force is actually conducting massive drills, and all their drills are literally violating the airspace of Taiwan. That's also a big problem. And we all know what happened with the line of actual control from India and China. You know the standoff that happened. But now things seem to be getting a little better because, well, China is not really thinking of India as its enemy number one. China is really looking at the United States of America as their enemy. And China has a very good relationship with Russia. And guess who else has a good relationship with Russia? India. If India, Russia and China kind of set aside their differences and kind of start cooperating together and say, hey, listen, let's not fight now. Let's take care of the bigger threat and let's improve our economies. We might see a massive new shift in the geopolitical landscape of things going forward. Will this affect every single Indian? Of course it will, because now suddenly you have a lot more opportunities opening up with China and Russia as well. Let's face it, guys, India and China still trade quite well. The trade relationships between India and China have always been good, except from a military standpoint, yes, there are still some problems that need to be solved. According to a recent interview which was conducted by Al Jazeera, and a Chinese diplomat or ex-diplomat spoke, he actually said, and I quote, he said, the problems between India and China are not made by India or China. It was made by the British East India. Basically, the problem that was created by the Britishers before they left India is still the problem that we are facing even today. Well, that's his opinion. People from India can argue on the other side, but there is something which is weird that is actually taking place. India and China are actually having back-channel talks today, which might see a resolution going forward in the near future. Why? I'll also explain why. Bangladesh recently got a new government which is pro-United States of America. Now, when you have a pro-US government in Bangladesh, that becomes a problem for both countries, India and China. India also doesn't want a pro-CIA vassal state in Bangladesh. Even China doesn't want the US military to suddenly set up an air force base or a military base inside Bangladesh, which can also happen. Well, if this is a threat to both the countries, the best way to deal with it is to cooperate with each other, I guess. They say that change is the only constant and everything changes in this world of global affairs. Take, for example, all millennials, we used to take pride in carrying Tupperware boxes to our schools, right, to eat food. And today, what happened to Tupperware? They recently shut down. They actually declared bankruptcy. So, yeah. So, change is really a good constant and things can change immediately. And I'm saying that maybe things can get better between India and China, and we might actually look at China as a more of a friend than an enemy. Let's see what happens. This is just a theory, by the way. If it happens, good. If it doesn't happen, well, it's status quo anyway. Now, when you look at the war in the Middle East and you look at Iran's role in it, Iran is a country that wants to basically procure nuclear missile capability. As simple as that. They want nuclear missiles because Israel happens to be the only nation in the Middle East that actually has nuclear missiles. But the problem is, if Iran gets nuclear capability, Saudi Arabia will also want to get nuclear capability. Now, Saudi Arabia and Iran they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but again, now there's diplomatic channel talks that are happening between Saudis and the Iranians, which basically means that the Middle East tussle between the Saudis and the Iranians is actually soon going to end, hopefully, because the war in Yemen is basically a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, where does Israel play a role in it? Israel almost signed the Abrahamic Accords. They almost opened diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. And just before October 7th of last year happened, Saudi Arabia and Israel were soon going to declare some sort of a diplomatic agreement. But unfortunately, October 7th happened and the war started, and this has taken a back step. And the person who actually got the Abrahamic Accords into play, into action, was moderated by, guess who? By former President Donald Trump, who is again in the race to become the president of America again. When you look at the future, or when you try to look at or try to predict what's going to happen in our world, we also need to look at the past. We have to look at the immediate past and also, go back a few years to basically try to find patterns to see what's really happening. The pattern that I have identified, at least from my point of view, is that maybe Abrahamic Accords will come back. Maybe we will see sort of a two-state solution that will come between Israel and Palestine, because every country is talking about it. Maybe it will actually come into action soon. But recently, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, the President of Israel, or whatever, the head of state of Israel, he actually came out and said that he has no problems with people from Lebanon and he has no problems with the civilians of Gaza. His problem lies against the Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and against the Hezbollah, which is also a terrorist organization. This is a terrorist organization declared by majority of the world bodies. That's the reason why we still might see hope. But again, war is bad because unfortunately civilians die. Whether you're a civilian in Palestine or Israel or Lebanon, अंत में common man को ही भुगतना पड़ता है सब कुछ, है ना? So that's the problem that we are seeing. So in this ridiculous game of who has who has bigger power than the other, pun intended, I would say that we are actually entering a very dicey state of affairs in the world today. Whether we will see a massive war, I don't know. Whether we will see something else, I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that right now it's a very sensitive state and anything can happen at any point of time. And all we can do is wait and watch. Because on one side, you have the BRICS who are getting together. You have the Quad Summit that is happening. On the other side, you have a pro-American government in Bangladesh. You are seeing India not liking it. You're seeing China not liking it. And the relationships between India and USA is very transactional right now. The relationships between India and Russia has also become very transactional because Russia recently opened up, had a very, very good summit with Pakistan, who happens to be India's enemy as well. So Russia is opening relationships with Pakistan. So a lot of interesting things and very weird things that are happening, and it's very transactional. Some are transactional, some are not transactional. So there are truly no allies in the world today. There's no ally. Nobody will be like, hey, you're my friend, I will stand by you forever. No, it doesn't work that way anymore. Everybody is working in their own self-interests. Every single country is being selfish. And that's why the negotiations that happen on these tables are a lot more interesting and a lot more better, because Everyone wants to get a win-win situation for themselves first and then the other person. And that's how geopolitical affairs are actually running. Because believe it or not, India is a hot commodity in the world today because of our population and also the fact that we are the largest growing economy in the world today. That being said, there are no allies. So Russia isn't our best friend. China isn't our worst enemy. USA is also not our friend. So you never know. And I think that's why we just have to keep an eye out on all these things, because we don't want to be in a situation, ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls, we don't want to be in a situation where something drastic happens tomorrow and we have no clue why it's happening. So let's keep an eye out on geopolitics for our own safety, for also seeking some opportunities here and there, and also just to improve your knowledge. Because guess what? Knowing these things also will add up to your social capital for sure. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was a little informative. I know it was a little vague, so don't comment on this is such a vague video, because today's video is just the beginning of a lot more content on geopolitics, and I'm going to take each and every issue separately and give you information and context pertaining to India going forward. So stay tuned to the Indian Millennials channel. There's a lot more coming from our side. Until next time, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, Vande Mataram.